He won't even remember signing it by morning. That was the sentence I heard first, though I would not learn for another 20 minutes that those exact words had come out of my own son's mouth in the hallway outside the kitchen. I did not hear him say it. A waitress did. And before Preston ever walked through the front door of that restaurant, she found a way to press a folded square of paper into my palm and whisper 4 words that changed the shape of the entire evening. Ride this before he sits down. I am Walter Graham. I am 71 years old. I built Graham Summit Properties out of nothing but a surveyor's notebook and a stubborn refusal to fail, and 11 months ago my only son stopped speaking to me. That night, out of nowhere, he called and asked me to dinner. I should have known better than to feel hopeful. I unfolded the note under the white tablecloth, my hand steady out of 40 years of habit even as my chest was not. The handwriting was small, urgent, pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper. Don't sign anything tonight. Don't drink the wine he orders for you. He brought someone with him you can't see from here. I am so sorry, Mr. Graham. You helped my mother once. I owe you this. I looked up. The waitress, a young woman with dark hair, pulled back tight and a name tag that read Marisol, was already 3 tables away, refilling water glasses as if she had said nothing at all. I did not know her. I had no memory of ever meeting her mother. But some kindnesses I had done over the years I never bothered to remember, because I never did them to be remembered. Apparently one of them had followed me here, into a night I did not yet understand I needed saving from. I folded the note twice and slid it into my breast pocket, over my heart, where I could feel the corner of it through the fabric for the rest of the meal. Then I did the only thing a man who has spent 4 decades reading a room before he ever sits down in it knows how to do. I put my face back together, and I waited. 11 months is a long silence between a father and a son who once could not go 2 days without a phone call about zoning variances or interest rates. 11 months ago, I had walked into Preston's office and found an environmental review for a downtown parcel that had been quietly rerouted away from the firm we had used for 18 years, redirected instead to a consulting name I had never heard of, approved and paid before I ever saw the invoice. I asked him about it once, calmly the way I ask about everything. He told me I was overreacting to a routine vendor change. I told him I did not build this company by ignoring routine things that did not add up. He told me I did not trust him. I told him trust was not the same thing as blindness. He walked out of my office and, save for 2 clipped emails about a lease renewal, he had not spoken a real word to me since. So when my phone rang last Tuesday and his name appeared on the screen for the first time in nearly a year, I sat very still in my study for 4 full rings before I answered it. "Dad," he said, and his voice had a warmth in it I had not heard since before his mother died. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want to fix this. Let me take you to dinner Friday. Just the 2 of us. Vanessa's bringing Lily by for dessert if that's all right. I miss my father." I told him that sounded fine. I did not tell him that my hand was shaking when I hung up the phone, not from age, but from the terrible, foolish, entirely human hope that maybe I was about to get my son back. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, because that is a habit 40 years of business does not let you break. And I was seated at a private corner booth Preston had reserved under his own name. The place was called Amberline, dim gold light, dark wood, the kind of restaurant where the waitstaff know which families own which buildings in the city and treat you accordingly. I ordered water. I did not order wine. I have never in my life needed a note from a stranger to tell me that. Marisol came to my table twice more before Preston arrived, each time with some small, unnecessary task, refolding a napkin, adjusting a candle that did not need adjusting, and each time she did not look at me directly, but her eyes flicked toward the front entrance and back to me, a silent countdown. I understood. Someone was coming that I would not immediately recognize as a threat. Preston arrived at 7 on the dot, and for one unguarded second before he saw me looking, his face did something I will never forget. It was not nervousness, it was not guilt, it was calculation, the exact flat, assessing look I have seen on the faces of men across a negotiating table my entire career, men deciding how much of the truth a room could survive. Then he saw me, and the look vanished, replaced by a smile so warm and so practiced that if I had not spent 40 years reading faces for a living, I would have believed it completely. "Dad," he said, sliding into the booth across from me and reaching out to grip my hand in both of his. "Thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve it." "You're my son," I said. "I will always come." He ordered a bottle of wine before I could stop him, an expensive Cabernet, and asked the sommelier to pour generously. I let my glass sit untouched at the edge of the table, close enough that it would look, from a distance, like a man who had been drinking. Preston did not seem to notice, or if he did, he chose not to comment. He talked. He talked about the West Side acquisition, about a hiking trip he wanted to take Lily on in the fall, about how much he had missed Sunday dinners at the house, about how sorry he was for the way things had gone 11 months ago. Every word of it sounded true. That was the terrible part. My son had always been a gifted liar, and I had spent 36 years mistaking that gift for charm. Halfway through the appetizer, the door chimed, and Vanessa walked in holding Lily's small hand, and something in my chest that had been braced tight since I read the note finally loosened, just slightly, at the sight of my granddaughter's face lighting up when she saw me. "Grandpa!" She climbed straight into the booth beside me before her mother could stop her, small arms around my neck, and I held her the way I had not let myself hold anything in 11 months, without calculation, without armor. Vanessa kissed my cheek, apologized for being a few minutes late, said something about traffic that I did not fully hear because Lily was pulling on my sleeve, telling me about a school project, a diorama of the solar system, insisting I come see it before it was due to be taken down. I told her I would come Saturday. I meant it. Whatever else was happening in that restaurant, that promise was real, and I intend to keep every promise I make to that child for as long as I am alive to keep it. It was Lily, in her small, unfiltered voice, who cracked the evening wide open before dessert even arrived. "Daddy said you don't remember things good anymore," she said, looking up at me with the particular seriousness only a 7-year-old can manage. "He said we have to be extra nice to you now because your brain is getting old and sick. Is that true, Grandpa? Are you going to forget me?" The table went silent in a way that had weight to it. I watched Vanessa's hand freeze halfway to her wine glass. I watched Preston's jaw tighten for exactly 1 second before he laughed it off, too quickly, too loudly, reaching over to tousle his daughter's hair. "Kids say the wildest things," he said. "I told her Grandpa's just getting older. Sweetheart, that's all." Everybody's memory changes a little. I looked at my granddaughter's face, so open, so certain, that whatever her father had told her was simply the truth of the world, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold, the way it used to go quiet and cold in the middle of a hostile negotiation, the moment I stopped feeling anything at all and started only calculating. "My brain is perfectly fine. Lily," I said gently, "I promise you I am not going anywhere, and I am not forgetting a single thing." She smiled, satisfied, and asked if she could order the chocolate cake, and the conversation moved on the way conversations do at family dinners, but I did not move on with it. I sat there smiling, nodding, asking Preston about the hiking trip, while underneath the table my mind was already working the way it works when I am reading a balance sheet that does not balance. Somewhere between the salad course and the entree, my son had told his own daughter that her grandfather's mind was failing. Not to me, never to me. To a 7-year-old, softly, as a fact already settled, already true, already something that needed to be gently managed rather than questioned. A man does not tell a small child a lie like that, unless he plans to tell a much larger room the same lie very soon. Near the end of the meal, after Lily had fallen half asleep against Vanessa's shoulder, and the plates had been cleared, Preston reached into his jacket and produced a folder, sliding it across the table with the same practiced, gentle warmth he had used all evening. "I wanted to give you something tonight, Dad," he said. "Something that would put my mind at ease. I know things have been strained. I know I haven't been the son I should have been. I want to take care of you the way you always took care of us. This is just a standard healthcare directive. It names a physician, sets up a wellness check-in schedule, nothing invasive. Vanessa's family doctor is wonderful, very discreet, very thorough. I just want to know that if anything ever happened, God forbid, we'd have someone in place who already understands your history. It would mean everything to me if you'd sign it tonight, just so I can stop lying awake worrying about you." I looked down at the folder. I did not open it. I did not need to. I could feel the folded note in my breast pocket like a second heartbeat. I told him, with a smile I had to reach very deep to find, that I never signed anything without my own counsel reviewing it first, family or not, and that had been true for 40 years and would remain true until the day I died. I told him I appreciated the thought more than he could know. I told him we would look at it together, properly, another day. Something flickered across his face, there and gone in under a second, and for the first time all night I saw the boy I had raised disappear completely, replaced by someone I did not recognize at all. "Of course, Dad," he said smoothly. "No rush." We said our goodbyes on the sidewalk outside Amberline, and Lily hugged my legs and made me promise again about the diorama, and Vanessa kissed my cheek and told me how good it was to see me looking so well. And Preston clasped my hand and told me he loved me, and I told him I loved him too, because I did, because that was also true. And true things and terrible things had apparently learned to live in the same house inside my son, without either one evicting the other. I drove home alone, through the city I had spent 40 years building, and I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence sit with me the way it had sat with me on so many long drives after board meetings that had gone badly, and I thought about a 7-year-old girl telling me, with complete confidence, that her father had already decided my mind was going. I did not know it yet. But that folder Preston had tried to hand me across a restaurant table would turn out to be the first thread of a rope my own son was quietly braiding to hang me with. I did not know yet how deep it went, how many hands had helped tie the knots, or how patiently they had all been waiting for me to simply grow old enough, or trusting enough, to put my neck through it willingly. What I did know, pulling into my own driveway well past 10 that night, was that somewhere in this city, a waitress I had never met had risked her job, and possibly more, to slide 4 sentences into my hand, and that whatever debt she believed she owed me, I now owed her one far larger in return. I let myself into the house, into the quiet that had lived there since Eleanor died 6 years ago, a quiet I had never fully made peace with. I did not turn on the main lights. I walked past the staircase, past the hallway lined with photographs of a boy in a Little League uniform, a boy at his college graduation, a boy standing beside me at his own wedding looking so proud, so full of promise, and I went into my study and closed the door. I did not pour myself a drink that night. My hands needed to stay steady for what came next. I sat down at my desk, pulled the folded note from my breast pocket, and smoothed it flat under the lamp. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I had not opened in longer than I wanted to admit, and lifted out a small locked wooden box that had belonged to my wife. Inside it, beneath a stack of old photographs and a ring I could not yet bring myself to wear, sat a sealed envelope in Eleanor's handwriting, addressed simply to Preston, written the year before she died, a letter she had asked me to give him when the time was right, and that I, in 11 months of silence and 30 years of quiet cowardice before that, had never once found the courage to hand over. I set the envelope on the desk beside the note from a stranger named Marisol, 2 pieces of paper from 2 women who had each, in their own way, tried to protect the people they loved, and I understood, sitting there in the dark, that I was going to need every ounce of the discipline that had built an $800 million company from a surveyor's notebooks, and 3 years of sleeping in a truck, because whatever my son and the people around him were planning, they had made one catastrophic error. They had assumed that because I had gone quiet for 11 months, I had also gone soft. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called after 9 at night in over a decade. Desmond Voss answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep and instantly alert. The moment he heard mine, the way any good lawyer's voice gets when his oldest client calls him near midnight and does not bother with hello. "Walter," he said. "What's happened?" I told him everything. The note, the folder, the healthcare directive with a physician's name I did not recognize, the way my 7-year-old granddaughter had been told, gently and deliberately, that her grandfather's mind was already failing before any doctor had ever examined me. I told him I needed to know, quietly, legally, and completely, exactly what my son had been doing behind my back for the last 11 months. And I told him I needed to know before Preston had any idea I was looking. Desmond was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost every trace of sleep. "I'll call Renata Cole in the morning," he said. "If there's a paper trail, she'll find it the right way. Nothing that gets thrown out of a courtroom later. And Walter, if a waitress had to warn a man not to sign his own healthcare directive at his son's dinner table, I don't think we're looking at carelessness anymore." "No," I said, looking at Eleanor's unopened letter sitting under the lamp like a quiet accusation I had let gather dust for 6 years. "I don't think we are either." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in 11 months I did not feel like a father grieving a broken relationship. I felt like exactly what I had been before I ever softened into fatherhood at all. A man who had once slept in a truck bed through 3 Ohio winters, rather than let anyone take from him what he had not yet finished building. Whatever my son thought he had started at that restaurant tonight, he had no idea that he had just woken up the version of me that built the empire he was so eager to inherit. The next morning I was at the office by 6, which was nothing unusual for me, except that this time I had asked Sarah, my assistant of almost 20 years, to make sure the outer doors stayed locked until Desmond arrived. Some habits from 40 years in commercial real estate never leave a man, and one of them is this. You never let the people who might be watching see you preparing for a fight before you are ready to throw the first punch. Desmond arrived at 7 with Renata Cole beside him, and I understood immediately why he had trusted her with something this delicate. She did not look like the private investigators in the movies my late wife used to watch on Sunday afternoons. She looked like a woman who had spent 20 years as a financial crimes detective before going private, because that is exactly what she was, and she carried a leather satchel instead of a gun, because paper, she told me once we sat down, was the only weapon that ever actually convicted anyone. "I don't hack anything, Mr. Graham," she said, setting a legal pad on my desk before she had even taken off her coat. "I don't touch a phone or an email account that isn't mine or already sitting in a public court filing. Everything I find the way a jury can look at it later, without a defense attorney getting it thrown out in the first 5 minutes. If that's too slow for you, I'm the wrong person for this job. It is exactly fast enough," I told her, and I meant it. I had learned that lesson decades earlier in a hostile takeover fight where a competitor tried to bury me with evidence gathered outside the law, only to watch every single page of it get tossed by a judge before lunch. I had not built an empire by cutting corners, and I was not going to lose it by cutting them now. By 9 that morning, Desmond had already pulled the county's business filings, and what he found took less than an hour to locate, because none of it had ever needed to be hidden from anyone who simply thought to look. A company called Larkspur Consulting Group had been registered 14 months earlier. Its registered agent, a small filing office, 2 blocks from the courthouse. Its listed managing member, a woman named Diane Foster. I sat with that name for a long moment. My son's mother-in-law. A woman who had never once, in 3 years of holiday dinners, mentioned owning so much as a card table, let alone a consulting firm. Desmond pulled the accounts payable ledger next, the one our own finance department kept. No backdoor required. Simply a request from the founder and chairman of the company to review his own books, a request no one in that building would ever think to question. Preston had personally approved 11 payments to Larkspur Consulting over the past year. Design and planning services, the memo lines read, for developments that, as far as either Desmond or I could determine, existed only on paper. $640,000. Moved from Graham Summit Properties into a company owned by a woman who had never designed so much as a birthday card. I did not shout. I did not slam my hand on the desk. I sat very still and watched the number sit there on the page, and I thought about my granddaughter's small, serious face, asking me if I was going to forget her. "There's more," Renata said quietly, and something in her voice made me look up. This part I did get the right way. I have a contact, retired now, who still keeps friendly with the state medical board. 3 weeks ago, a nurse named Odalis Ferris filed a formal complaint against a Dr. Absalom Reyes, neurology practice on the East Side. The complaint alleges he's been falsifying cognitive evaluations for a fee. She quit the practice the same week she filed it. The board opened an investigation. It's still open, Absalom Reyes, I repeated. That is the name Preston tried to put on the healthcare directive last night. Renata nodded slowly. I'd like to talk to that nurse, she said. If she's willing, and if what she has lines up with what's sitting in front of us, we won't need to break a single law to bury your son in the truth. It'll already be sitting in a state file with her name on it. I told her to make the call. That afternoon, Odalis Ferris agreed to meet Renata at a coffee shop 2 miles from the clinic where she used to work, and she brought with her, entirely of her own free will, copies of 3 cognitive evaluation reports she had personally witnessed Dr. Reyes complete in under 11 minutes each, reports that concluded with diagnoses of advancing dementia for patients she said had walked into that office, reciting stock portfolios from memory. She told Renata she had seen a folder on Reyes's desk with my name on the tab before she ever quit. She had not opened it. She had not needed to. She said the doctor kept a specific manila folder for what he called special cases, patients whose families paid a flat consulting fee up front rather than billing insurance at all. And mine, she said, had been sitting in that stack for nearly a month. I want to be very clear with you, Mr. Graham. Odalis told Renata, in words Renata repeated to me almost exactly that evening. I didn't come forward because of you. I don't know you. I came forward because I watched that man take a healthy 70-year-old woman's independence away from her with a fountain pen, so her son could sell her house out from under her. And I couldn't sleep after that. If what's happening to you is the same thing, I hope you have people who love you enough to stop it before it finishes. I sat with that sentence for a long time after Renata left my office that night. I have people who love me enough. I thought of Lily's small arms around my neck in that booth. I thought of a waitress named Marisol, who owed me a debt I could not even remember creating. I thought of my son, standing in a hallway telling someone, on the phone, that I would not even remember signing away my own mind by morning. And then I thought about Eleanor's letter, still sitting on my desk where I had left it the night before, unopened for the second night in a row, because some part of me, the part that had survived being poor and cold and hungry for 3 years in the cab of a truck, understood that the moment I opened it, I would have to feel something I was not yet ready to feel, and I needed every ounce of cold clarity I possessed for what was coming. Desmond wanted to call the district attorney by the end of that week. I told him no. Walter, he said, sitting across from me in my study on Thursday night, his voice carrying the particular frustration of a man who has spent his entire career believing the fastest legal path is always the correct one. We have embezzlement. We have a state medical board investigation already open. We have a whistleblower willing to testify. This is more than enough for an arrest warrant tonight. Every day we wait is a day they could destroy evidence, or worse, actually convince a doctor to sign something that gets used against you in a courtroom before you've even had a chance to fight it. I understand the risk, I told him. I am not blind to it. But if we move tonight, Preston hires the best defense money can buy with funds he has already stolen from me, and in 3 years, maybe 4, he serves 18 months in a facility with a tennis court, and Diane Foster claims she never knew a thing, and Vanessa divorces him and keeps the house, and somewhere in all of that, my granddaughter grows up believing her grandfather destroyed her father out of spite. I did not survive 4 decades of this business by taking the fast, satisfying option. I survived it by taking the option that actually wins. Desmond studied me for a long moment, and something in his face shifted from frustration into the grim respect of a man who has watched me do this exact thing to far more dangerous opponents than my own son. What did you have in mind? He asked. I told him. I would let Preston believe he had won. I would play the part he and Diane and their bribed doctor had already written for me, the confused, softening old man, too far gone to notice his own company being hollowed out from underneath him. I would make small, visible mistakes. I would let the rumor of my decline travel through the office the way rumors always do, faster than any memo, And when Preston felt safe enough, confident enough, greedy enough to reach for more than embezzlement, I would hand him exactly the kind of rope that men like that can never resist grabbing with both hands. Because there was one piece of this puzzle Desmond and Renata did not yet know about, a piece that had been sitting quietly in a storage box in my garage for 46 years, waiting, as it turned out, for precisely this moment before I ever built a single tower, before Graham Summit Properties existed as anything more than a name I had scrawled on a napkin. I spent 3 years as a junior field surveyor for a soil engineering firm, walking abandoned industrial lots with a clipboard and a set of core sampling tools, testing ground before anyone would let a shovel touch it. I kept a field journal in those years, the way surveyors did before everything went digital. Hand-drawn maps, soil composition notes, contamination readings in my own cramped 19-year-old handwriting. Most of what I logged in those 3 years meant nothing to anyone now. But one parcel, an old rail yard on the northern edge of the county called the Wexford site, had come back from testing in the spring of 1979 with heavy metal contamination readings so severe that the firm I worked for quietly buried the report and walked away from the client rather than risk the liability. I had never forgotten it. I had kept my copy of that journal for reasons I could not fully explain even to myself. Some young man's instinct that the ground never really forgets what has been poured into it, no matter how many decades of asphalt get laid on top. Wexford Yards had sat undeveloped and forgotten for 46 years. And 3 months before Preston stopped speaking to me, purely by coincidence, I had heard through an old industry contact that the site had quietly been reclassified, its history scrubbed clean by decades of shell corporations and paperwork nobody bothered to dig through, and was now being marketed as prime commercial land near a new transit corridor. I had filed that information away the way I file everything away, without immediate use, simply because a man does not survive 4 decades in this business by throwing knowledge out. I did not yet know that a 46-year-old contamination reading in a dead man's handwriting, sitting in a cardboard box in my garage, was about to become the single most valuable document I owned. Friday morning, I called Preston into my office. I want you to understand what it cost me to sit behind that desk and perform the role I had chosen for myself. I unbuttoned my collar. I let my suit jacket hang slightly wrong on my shoulders. I left the blinds half drawn, so the light in the room sat dim and gray, and I set an amber prescription bottle, empty, purchased that morning from a pharmacy 3 towns over, so no one at my own company would recognize the label, on the corner of my desk, where anyone sitting across from me would see it immediately. Preston knocked softly and stepped inside, and I watched his eyes go straight to that bottle before they ever reached my face. And for just a fraction of a second, something moved behind his expression that I can only describe as relief. "Dad," he said, "are you feeling all right? You look tired." I let my hand tremble slightly as I gestured for him to sit. I told him the weekend had been difficult, that I had spent hours going over quarterly numbers I used to be able to read in my sleep and found myself lost halfway through, that I was frightened, genuinely frightened, of what was happening to my own mind. Every word of it was a lie, and every word of it, God forgive me, came out sounding exactly like the truth, because somewhere underneath the performance was a real and terrible grief that had nothing to do with my memory, and everything to do with the man sitting across from me, pretending to care whether I lived or died. He told me it was okay. He told me he was ready to carry more of the weight. He reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, and I let him, and I hated every second of it, and I did not let a single flicker of that hatred reach my face. Then I slid the Wexford portfolio across the desk toward him. I told him it was a suburban parcel, prime land near the new transit line, projected returns that would make any developer's mouth water. I told him I did not want Graham Summit to hold it. I told him, my voice deliberately thin and frightened, that I was terrified of making some catastrophic error with the company's money, if my mind kept slipping the way it had been slipping, and that I wanted him to buy it himself, under his own company, with Graham Summit simply guaranteeing the loan, so that whatever happened to me, the profit would already belong to him free and clear. An early inheritance, I called it. Before I stepped down, I watched greed and caution war across my son's face in real time, the way I have watched it war across 100 faces at 100 negotiating tables. He asked why I wanted it held separately instead of simply folded into the company. I told him, because if my judgment fails and the board ever has to review my recent decisions, I don't want this deal anywhere near their microscope. I want it protected. I want you protected. He believed me completely, because it was exactly the kind of paranoid softening logic he and Dr. Reyes had already prepared to present to my own board of directors. And there is no lie a man swallows faster than the one that confirms what he has already decided to believe about you. He left my office holding that portfolio against his chest, like a man holding a winning lottery ticket. And the moment the door clicked shut behind him, I sat up straight, unrolled my sleeves, and swept the empty prescription bottle into the trash. Renata's surveillance, entirely legal, conducted from a parked car on a public street outside Preston's own house, caught the rest 3 days later. Preston had told Diane about the deal over dinner on their own back patio, voice carrying easily in the summer air through an open kitchen window, no wiretap required, simply a woman with a directional microphone, doing her job from a public sidewalk 40 feet away. Diane, it turned out, was not merely willing to help hide the embezzlement. She was the architect of the entire operation, and she wasted no time convincing Preston that involving Graham Summit's board as guarantor on the loan would only invite scrutiny that might expose Larkspur Consulting before the board meeting ever happened. Cut the company out entirely. Renata's recording captured her saying, her voice flat and businesslike, a woman discussing a spreadsheet rather than her own family's future. Take the loan against your house. Use Larkspur as the cross-guarantor. It's cash-rich on paper from the consulting fees. Keep every dollar of this for us. Your father's too far gone to argue, and the board will never see it coming. I listened to that recording alone in my study late on a Tuesday night. Eleanor's letter still sitting unopened beside my elbow, and for one unguarded moment I let myself feel the full weight of what I was hearing. My son's mother-in-law calling me too far gone in my own son's kitchen, while my granddaughter likely slept 2 rooms away. By that Friday, exactly as Diane had instructed, Preston mortgaged the fully paid house I had bought him in cash as a wedding gift, and Larkspur Consulting signed on as cross-guarantor for the balance, and the closing documents for the Wexford Yards parcel were fully executed with not one signature from Graham Summit Properties anywhere on the paperwork. They had done exactly what I needed them to do. They had cut my company out entirely, out of pure greed, out of their own desperate hunger to keep every dollar for themselves. And in doing so, they had voluntarily chained themselves, with their own hands, to a piece of poisoned ground that I alone, out of every person involved in that transaction, already knew the truth about. I sat at my desk that Friday night with Desmond on the phone confirming the deed had recorded, and I felt something settle in my chest that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief, but some cold, exhausted cousin of both. They think they have stolen an empire from a dying old man, I told Desmond. What they have actually done is sign their own names to a debt the ground itself is about to collect. And somewhere in this city, I knew my son was pouring himself a celebratory drink, believing the hardest part was already behind him, with no idea at all that the board meeting he had scheduled to strip me of everything I had built was about to become the exact stage on which I intended to make sure he lost everything he had. The next 7 days were the hardest performance of my professional life, and I have negotiated hostile takeovers in rooms full of men who wanted to see me ruined. I misplaced files I had memorized decades ago. I asked Sarah to repeat the name of a partner I had known for 30 years. I let Preston walk me through spreadsheets I could have recited in my sleep, and I watched him narrate the numbers to me slowly, patiently, the exact tone a man uses with a child, and I thanked him for his patience, while something in my chest burned white and cold. By Thursday, Vance would have called it flawless if Vance had existed in my world at all. But I did not need a hired cyber operator to tell me my performance was working. I needed only to watch my son's shoulders relax a little more each day, watch the wary tightness leave his face, watch him stop covering his tracks because he no longer believed there was anyone left in the building sharp enough to notice. Odalys Ferris agreed to testify formally to the state medical board that same week, and Desmond, working entirely through proper channels, filed a parallel complaint with the district attorney's financial crimes division, laying out the Larkspur consulting payments in a report so clean and so thoroughly documented that the assistant district attorney who reviewed it called Desmond back within 48 hours to say 2 detectives would be standing by quietly the following Monday, the day of Graham Summit's annual board meeting. I want to be honest about the one thing I still had not done in all of that preparation. Eleanor's letter sat on my desk every night, and every night I looked at it, and every night I put it back in the drawer unopened. I told myself I did not have the time. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid that whatever my wife had written to our son before she died would break something in me I needed to keep whole for just a few more days. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of overcast sky that makes a boardroom feel like a courtroom before anyone has said a word. I arrived early, dressed my part, blinds drawn low, and took my seat at the head of the long table as the directors filed in one by one. Men and women who had built this empire alongside me for decades, watching me now with the careful, pitying eyes of people who had already heard the rumors. Preston had spent a week quietly seeding through the building. Preston entered at 9 sharp, flanked by outside counsel he had hired without ever telling me, wearing the kind of somber charcoal suit a man wears to a funeral he has scheduled himself. He rested a hand on my shoulder as he passed, asked in a voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest directors to hear whether I was feeling up to today's proceedings, and I nodded slowly, keeping my hands folded on the table to hide how steady they were. The routine business moved fast, the way it always does right before the real business of a meeting begins. Then, at exactly 10:30, Preston stood. He spoke first about legacy, about everything I had built from nothing, about how much he loved and admired me, and his voice cracked in exactly the right places, a performance he had clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror in the house I had bought him. Then his tone shifted, heavy with manufactured sorrow, and he told the room that his father's mind had been declining for months, that he had tried everything to protect my dignity, that the family had finally insisted on an independent neurological evaluation, and that the results had been devastating. He opened his briefcase and distributed copies of Dr. Reyes's fabricated dossier down the length of the table. He invoked the medical incapacity clause I had written into our bylaws 30 years earlier. He asked the board, with tears standing in his eyes, to vote to transfer full executive authority to him, for my own good, to let the old lion rest. The room went silent, directors flipping through pages of a diagnosis that did not exist anywhere except in a bribed man's imagination, and every eye in that boardroom turned toward me, waiting for the confused, broken reaction Preston had promised them. I let out a short, quiet laugh instead, several directors startled. Preston's composed grief flickered, just barely, into something closer to alarm. "Dad," he said carefully, "are you all right?" "I have never felt clearer in my life," I said, and I reached under the desk and pressed the intercom. The double doors at the back of the boardroom opened. Desmond walked in first. Behind him came Odalys Ferris, pale but steady, and 2 detectives from the district attorney's financial crimes division, and last, escorted in by building security at my request, a state medical board investigator holding a folder with Dr. Reyes's name typed across the tab. Preston's face drained of color in real time. "Dr. Reyes could not attend today," Desmond said, addressing the room, his voice calm and carrying easily. "He is currently cooperating with the state medical board investigation opened 3 weeks ago after this woman, Nurse Odalys Ferris, filed a formal complaint documenting a pattern of falsified cognitive evaluations sold to families for a flat fee. Mr. Graham's name appeared in Dr. Reyes's private files before that complaint was ever filed." "That's a lie," Preston said. Too fast, his voice cracking for real this time. "That's not, Dad, it's not a lie, son," I said quietly. "It's a paper trail, and paper trails don't lie, even when the people who leave them do." I opened the leather bag beside my chair and set an old, sun-faded field journal on the table between us. The cover cracked with age, my own 19-year-old handwriting visible on the first page beneath the light. I did soil surveys before I ever built a single building in this city, I said. 1979. A rail yard called Wexford. I logged contamination readings so severe the firm I worked for buried the report and walked away rather than risk the liability. That report never disappeared. It sat in a box in my garage for 46 years, because I never throw away anything that might one day matter. I watched understanding hit my son like a physical blow. You told your mother-in-law to cut Graham Summit out of that loan entirely, I said. You wanted every dollar for yourselves so badly that you mortgaged the house I bought you and let a shell company sign as guarantor instead of letting my board anywhere near the deal. You built yourself a wall to keep me out of your profits. What you actually built was a wall to keep my company safe from a $15 million federal cleanup liability that is now entirely legally yours. Preston did not sit down so much as fold, dropping back into his chair as though his legs had simply stopped answering him. One of the detectives stepped forward and asked Preston, evenly, professionally, whether he would like to make a statement regarding the $640,000 in fraudulent consulting payments made to Larkspur Consulting Group over the past 14 months. The boardroom doors opened again before Preston could answer. Vanessa and Diane walked in together, mid-sentence, Diane already laughing at something. Both of them clearly expecting to find a celebration in progress rather than the wreckage they had walked into. Diane's laughter died in her throat. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Diane's eyes moved from the detectives to Odalus to the folder with Dr. Reyes's name on it, to her own son-in-law, slumped and gray in his chair, and I watched her, in real time, begin calculating an exit that did not exist. Mrs. Foster, one of the detectives said, stepping toward her, "We'll need you to come with us as well. We have documentation connecting you to Larkspur Consulting Group as its managing member." "This is insane," Diane said, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "I run a consulting firm. I have every right. A consulting firm with no employees, no office, and no clients besides your own son-in-law's company," Desmond said calmly. "The court will have questions about that arrangement, Mrs. Foster." Preston finally lifted his head and looked at me, and for one unguarded moment I saw, underneath 39 years of a man I no longer recognized, the boy who used to run across our front lawn with a baseball glove, desperate for my approval. "Dad, please," he said, voice breaking apart entirely. "Please. I'll fix it. I'll pay it back. You have to help me. I'm your son." I looked down at him for a long moment, and I felt everything. The grief and the fury and the exhausted love all tangled together in a knot I did not try to untie in front of that room. "You told my granddaughter I was losing my mind," I said quietly. "You said it to a 7-year-old before you ever said it to a single doctor. You didn't do that because you believed it. You did it because you needed a witness small enough not to ask questions." I straightened, and my voice hardened into the one I had used across 40 years of negotiating tables. "I am not the one who forfeited this family, Preston. You did that the moment you decided my life's work was something to be harvested rather than earned." I turned to the board. "The executive vice president is terminated, effective immediately," I said. "I trust the rest of you can find your way back to actual business." The detectives moved Preston toward the door. Diane was still protesting loudly about her reputation, about respectable society, about a misunderstanding, right up until the moment the second detective produced her own paperwork. And the room understood there was no misunderstanding left to argue. Vanessa stood frozen against the wall, her name notably absent from every document Desmond had gathered, spared the indictment but not the collapse now happening around her. Her husband's house already facing foreclosure from a private lender who would move within the month. Once news of the fraudulent guarantee reached them, her mother facing federal environmental liability for a piece of land neither of them had ever bothered to have properly surveyed before signing their names to a $15 million loan. I stood at the head of that boardroom table long after the doors closed behind them, Desmond quietly gathering his files, the directors filing out in stunned silence, and I found, to my own surprise, that I felt no triumph at all. Only a vast, aching quiet, the kind that settles into a house after a storm, has finally passed through and left nothing standing the way it stood before. I picked up the old field journal from the table, ran my thumb over the cracked leather cover, and thought about a 19-year-old boy in muddy boots who could not have imagined, not in a single one of his wildest ambitions, that the ground he was testing that spring would one day be the only thing standing between his own son and a prison built entirely out of his own greed. The board meeting made the business section of every paper in the city by Wednesday morning, and I let Desmond field every reporter who called, because there was nothing left for me to prove to anyone in a headline. What mattered to me that week happened in far quieter rooms. Preston was charged with felony embezzlement and wire fraud, and 2 weeks later, facing the full weight of the district attorney's evidence, he accepted a plea deal that would keep him out of a courtroom trial and put him behind bars for 4 years, with restitution ordered against whatever remained of his mortgaged, foreclosed life. Diane Foster fought harder and lost worse, her fingerprints too deeply pressed into Larkspur Consulting's every document to argue her way free, and the state added charges related to the medical board investigation once Dr. Reyes, facing the loss of his license and a fraud charge of his own, agreed to testify against her rather than go down for her scheme alone. The Wexford Yards parcel sat exactly where I had left it, a $15 million federal environmental liability with both their names on the deed and not $1 of Graham Summit Properties anywhere near it. Vanessa kept the small rental house she moved into after the bank took the mansion, and she kept, more importantly, full custody of Lily, and I made sure, quietly, through Desmond, that she never wanted for the practical necessities a 7-year-old needs, while her mother rebuilt a life from a wreckage she had not personally caused, even if she had not to see it while it was happening around her. I did not go easy on any of them out of forgiveness. I want to be honest about that. I went easy where the law allowed me to, because cruelty had never been the point. Consequences had been the point. There is a difference, and it took me most of my life to fully understand it. 3 weeks after the board meeting, on a Saturday I had promised weeks earlier and never once forgot, I drove to Vanessa's small rental house to see Lily's solar system diorama, exactly as I had told her I would. She met me at the door in socks, breathless, already pulling me by the hand toward her room, and Vanessa stood in the hallway watching us with an expression I could not fully read. Something between grief and gratitude, a woman learning in real time the difference between the family she had married into and the family that had chosen to stay. "Grandpa, look," Lily said, presenting a shoebox with planets made of painted styrofoam balls hanging from strings, Saturn's ring slightly crooked, Earth colored almost entirely blue. I told her it was the finest diorama I had ever seen in my life, and I meant every word of it the way a man means the truest things he says. She sat beside me on her bedroom floor afterward, quiet for a moment in the particular way children go quiet right before they ask the question that has actually been sitting in them the whole time. "Grandpa," she said, "Daddy did something really bad, didn't he? That's why he's not here anymore." I told her the truth, in words small enough for a 7-year-old to hold without breaking under the weight of them. I told her that her father had made choices that hurt people, including me, and that those choices had consequences, and that grown-ups sometimes have to be away for a long time to learn from consequences, the way children learn from timeouts, only much bigger. "Do you still love him?" she asked, "even though he was bad to you?" I sat with that question longer than I have sat with almost any question in my life, longer than boardroom negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars, because a child had just handed me, without meaning to, the exact center of everything I had been circling for weeks. "I love him because he is my son," I told her. "That never stops, not for one single day, no matter what he does." But loving someone and letting them hurt you forever are not the same thing. Sometimes loving someone the right way means you have to let them face what they did, so that someday, if they choose to, they can become someone worth loving you back the right way too. She thought about that with the total seriousness of a child deciding something matters. And then she hugged me, arms tight around my neck the way she had at Amberline the night this entire nightmare began, and I held her exactly as long as she needed to be held, and something in my chest that had been clenched shut for 11 months, finally, quietly, let go. That evening, back home, I sat down at my desk, and I did not put Eleanor's letter back in the drawer. I opened it. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, careful. The handwriting of a woman already tired from illness, but determined to finish what she had started. It was not long. It did not predict a single thing that had happened to our family in the 6 years since she wrote it, because Eleanor had never been a fortune teller, only a mother who loved her son and worried, in the ordinary way all good mothers worry, about what he might become. My darling Preston, it began, by the time your father gives you this, I hope you are a father yourself, and I hope you already understand what I am about to tell you, because you have lived it rather than simply heard it from me. Do not let money become the thing you offer instead of yourself. Your father built an empire so that you would never go hungry, and I have watched that empire, at times, quietly swallow the very things it was built to protect. Love your family with your time before you ever try to love them with your wallet. Whatever you build in this life, build it so that when you are gone, the people who loved you remember your hands and your voice, not your signature on a check. I love you more than any fortune either of your parents ever built. Please, please remember that the ledger that matters most in this life was never the one your father kept in his office. I read it twice. I sat with it a long time after that, the house quiet around me, and I let myself cry for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, not for the letter itself, but for the 6 years I had let it sit unopened in a drawer out of my own stubborn grief, 6 years in which I might have handed my son his mother's actual voice, instead of letting him hear only my silence. I understood then, sitting alone in that study, the mistake that belonged entirely to me, separate from anything Preston or Diane or Vanessa had done. I had built Graham Summit Properties out of poverty and terror, out of 3 winters in a truck bed, and a promise that my child would never know hunger the way I had, and in doing that I had taught him, without ever meaning to, that love arrived mostly in the form of things. New cars, debt-free tuition, an executive title handed to him before he had earned the wisdom to hold it responsibly. I had given him every comfort, and, somewhere in the exhausting decades of building an empire, I had not given him enough of simply myself. Eleanor had seen it before either of us did. She had tried to leave him the correction I never delivered. I did not tell myself this excused what he did. A man is still responsible for the choices he makes with his own 2 hands, no matter what shaped him into someone capable of making them. But I stopped, that night, needing him to be a monster in order for any of this to make sense, and I let him simply be my son, flawed and fallen, and, for now, gone from my life in the way that consequences sometimes require. The following week, I drove to Amberline alone, on a slow Tuesday evening when the dinner rush had not yet begun, and I asked the host if Marisol was working. She came out from the back looking uncertain, wiping her hands on her apron, clearly bracing for something she could not predict. I wanted to thank you properly, I told her, and I told her I did not fully remember her mother, but that whatever kindness had passed between us years ago had apparently mattered enough that she was willing to risk her job to return it, and that I did not know many people left in this world who would do that for a near stranger. Her eyes filled, and she told me her mother had been a housekeeper at one of my properties 15 years earlier, that she had gotten sick, that an anonymous fund through the company had quietly covered nearly a year of treatment no insurance would touch, and that her mother had told her, before she passed, that if she ever had the chance to do a kindness for the man behind that fund, she should take it without hesitation. I did not remember authorizing that fund specifically. I had authorized dozens like it over the years, quiet things, never announced, never attached to a press release, because I had learned early in my life what it felt like to need help and be too proud to ask for it, and I had promised myself, sleeping in that truck bed in 1979, that if I ever had enough to spare, I would spend some of it where no one was watching. I want you to have something, I told Marisol, and I handed her an envelope, not extravagant, simply enough to cover a semester of the nursing program she mentioned, almost shyly, She had been saving toward for 2 years. She tried to refuse it. I told her that some debts are not meant to be repaid, only passed forward, and that she had already repaid hers in full. The night she slipped 4 sentences into an old man's hand and possibly saved him from signing away his own mind. In the weeks that followed, Desmond and I restructured the company's board bylaws to remove the medical incapacity proxy clause entirely, replacing it with an independent court-appointed review process no single family member could weaponize a loan ever again. I redirected a significant portion of my personal holdings into a scholarship foundation in Eleanor's name, aimed at young people from backgrounds like the one I had crawled out of, ambition without inheritance, the kind of hunger that builds something rather than the kind that simply consumes what someone else already built. The loyal staff who had stood by me through decades of hostile takeovers and market crashes. The people who had actually bled alongside me to build this company rather than simply inherited a title inside it, received a portion of restructured shares I had once, foolishly, earmarked entirely for a son who had never once asked them their names. On the 1-year anniversary of that dinner at Amberline, I went back, and this time I brought Lily with me, and Vanessa joined us for dessert, still careful, still rebuilding trust in small, deliberate steps, and Marisol in her 2nd year of nursing school now, stopped by our table on her break, not to slip me a warning this time, only to say hello. I sat there in that same corner booth, watching my granddaughter argue happily with her mother over whether chocolate or vanilla cake was objectively superior, and I thought about the man who had sat in that exact seat a year earlier, waiting for a son who arrived already planning his downfall, a note folded and hidden in his breast pocket like a second heartbeat. Blood does not excuse betrayal, and love does not require you to hand a thief the keys twice. But love, real love, the kind Eleanor tried to leave behind in a letter I was too proud to deliver for 6 long years, also does not disappear simply because someone breaks it. It waits. It rebuilds itself in small rooms, over diorama planets and chocolate cake, in the space between a grandfather and a granddaughter who never once needed a fortune to understand exactly what family was supposed to mean. I built an empire out of poverty and stubbornness so that the people I loved would never go hungry. I nearly lost sight of the fact that hunger comes in more than one form, and that the kind money cannot fix is the kind that quietly costs you everything if you let it go unfed for too long. Protect what you built with your own 2 hands, but never mistake the empire for the reason you built it. The reason should always be small enough to sit on your lap and argue about chocolate cake. If this story reminded you that the people who love you quietly are worth more than the ones who flatter you loudly, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.